A very warm welcome. My name is Charmaine Shepherd. I'm a functional medicine practitioner. I help people navigate through challenging health conditions. And today we'll be talking about the perimenopausal brain. So changes that tend to happen around this phase in a woman's life that can impact on brain health. When I put together this presentation, I went into Google. I was looking for an image to use just as to start the presentation off. And this is the first image that came up. And it really stood out to me because in addition to the things that women normally would complain about around this time, in other words, menstrual changes and weight gain and bladder issues, we tend to see a lot of neurological symptoms as well. We've got sleep problems, mood changes, hot flashes, night sweats, panic attacks, anger, irritability. And today, really, what I want to do is to show you that a lot of these symptoms that we experience are actually as a result of the changes in hormones within the brain itself. So perimenopausal symptoms, primarily that are coming from the brain, insomnia, hot flashes, mood swings, brain fog, anxiety, irritability. So these are very common complaints that women will come in, and they are all, as a direct result of changes that happen within the brain. So what I really would like to start off by saying is that perimenopause is a natural phase. And, all women are going to have to navigate going through this process. It is a natural transition that happens. And so I don't want to medicalize it. But at the same time, if we can make this journey as easy as possible without too many effects, it can be very helpful. I see a lot of women, high-functioning businesswomen, executive women, who are at the point of wanting to give up their work because of brain changes. They're struggling to concentrate and focus. They've got brain fog. They're not sleeping well. And so for me, making sure that although we have to go through this transition, doing it as smoothly as possible can make such a big difference in terms of quality of life for many women. So symptoms, as I said, are largely neurological, and most women will transition through perimenopause with no long-term adverse effects. It is a natural phase of life, but it's also a very critical period to prevent cognitive decline later on in life. We know that many neurological degenerative conditions are more common in women, including dementia. And so this is a really critical period of time where looking after the brain becomes really important. So we can see that in perimenopause, about 20% of women will be asymptomatic. They'll just sail through this without any concerns at all. But 80%, which is a really large number, will have symptoms. Of those, 30% will have only hot flashes, but a big whopping 70% of women will experience hot flashes plus cognitive decline, mood changes, insomnia, depression, brain fog. And that's a large number of women that will be struggling with some of these symptoms. This information comes from a really interesting paper in the journal Nature, where they looked at regions in the brain to search for estrogen receptors. So in other words, which regions of the brain are rich in receptors that allow for estrogen to have an impact. I was really surprised when I saw this. So the executive and working memory is areas are very, very rich in estrogen receptors. If you look at the thalamus, which is sensory integration, there are some receptors there as well. Hypothalamus, as many women will be aware, because that is the area of the brain that regulates temperature, so hot flashes, regulates sleep, energy, balance, and food intake. And then we have information and processing, so short-term memory, learning and memory, serotonergic system, which affects your mood, motivation, emotion, and then your adrenergic system, which is attention, anxiety. So all of these areas in the brain, very, very rich in receptors for estrogen. And that becomes really important because it means that if estrogen levels are changing, these areas are very dependent on those changes. So what does estrogen do in the brain? What role does it play? Estrogen plays a role in many different functions within the body, cardiovascular, for instance, but specifically within the brain, it plays a role in regulating cerebral blood flow. So how much blood is kind of moving through and getting to all of the tissues within the brain. And I'll show you an image a little later on that shows how this changes around menopause. Glucose uptake into cells. So glucose is the main source of energy for the brain. Estrogen allows that to be taken up into the cells. Mitochondrial function, these are the little batteries within the brain that power it on. Estrogen plays a really important role in getting those batteries working well. Regulating something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is like miracle grow for the brain. It's kind of a stimulant for brain nerve growth. And then the integrity of membranes within the nerve cells. Again, this is something we'll come back to, which is really important as well. But let's start off looking at glucose. Glucose is the primary fuel for the brain, and it's so important for the body to keep levels really stable from the moment we're born until the last breath. And estrogen is one of the key elements that will stabilize glucose and also increase blood flow to get nutrients to all regions of the brain, and allowing our brains to be really immersed in enough oxygen and glucose. Estrogen will also increase the uptake of glucose into the cells, and sometimes you can see this in menstruating cycling women. There are changes throughout the cycle in things like sugar cravings. And then estrogen regulates the whole bioenergetics within the brain. So blood glucose metabolism. This is probably one of the most critical things that we see as well. You'll notice here the graph is broken up into premenopause, perimenopause, and menopause. The green line indicates blood glucose metabolism. The blue line indicates symptoms. So you can see that in the first phase of our lives in premenopause, your glucose metabolism levels are very high. And then as we hit perimenopause, those levels begin to rapidly drop. And at the same time, our symptoms spike as a result. And then eventually, there'll be a leveling out where your blood glucose metabolism will level out at a lower level. Symptoms will drop down again, although notice that they never go back to premenopausal levels. So there's a direct correlation between how the body manages glucose and the symptoms. And so blood glucose regulation is probably one of the most critical areas to look at during perimenopause. So this is an image that many of you will be familiar with, but it's just an explanation of what happens with glucose in the body. So every time you eat, you're going to find that there's a rise in glucose. So this blue line on the graph, glucose will increase. And as glucose increases, the body releases a hormone called insulin, which allows glucose to move into the cells, and then you'll find your blood glucose levels begin to drop. And then if you eat again, those levels go up. So there's this constant, very careful regulation of blood glucose that has to take place, because blood glucose levels should stay within a very tight range. You can see this green dotted line there. So if you're eating something that's high in sugar, you're going to get a big rise. The body's going to pump in a lot of insulin, and you're going to get a big drop, and then you're going to feel you need something. So there's a little bit of an energy drop, or you can see here even blood sugar crashes, feels like low mood, depression, sometimes anxiety as well. So we feel we need to eat something to get the blood glucose up again. So you eat something sugary and then it spikes, and then you keep going on this roller coaster. So the glucose roller coaster is the one thing that's going to have such a big impact. But we know that if your blood glucose levels are spiking and dropping, you're going to be having more flashes, you're going to be having more anxiety, more mood issues, more difficulty in kind of getting enough blood and vascular flow to the brain as well. So keeping blood sugar levels stable is really, really important at this phase in life. Then we spoke a little bit about the mitochondria. So these are the mitochondria that are the little batteries within the brain cells. Well, they're actually in all cells, but our focus is on the brain. So estrogen levels, the higher your estrogen levels are, like you can see in this first phase of premenopause, we have a very high energy capacity, and really good production of energy from these batteries. But as your estrogen levels begin to drop, and glucose metabolism begins to drop as well, you can see then that often there's a little bit of damage that happens to these batteries as well. Now, there is an alternative energy fuel for the brain, which is ketones, but they can only be accessed when blood glucose levels are at a lower level. So if you're having spikes of blood glucose, the brain is unable to access these ketones anyway. And so over time, you can have, as your estrogen levels drop and the energy levels begin to drop, it can be a little bit of a feed-forward cycle where these batteries just really fail and don't work as well as they should. And membrane integrity. This is really important. So you've heard me speak about receptors on estrogen receptors. Our cell membranes contain little docking stations, which we call receptors. And these docking stations are not just for estrogen, they're for so many critical factors, thyroid hormone, there are receptors for nerve signaling as well. So they sit on top of these membranes, and the membranes then become a key area for communication within cells. And it's not just a bag that holds the contents of the cell. These membranes around the cells actually are actively involved in cell signaling. So if membranes get damaged, unfortunately, you'll find that signaling of hormones are also reduced. I wanted to bring this in because just to show you that if you zoom into what these membranes look like, they are called lipid membranes. And so it's a double layer of fats, really. And if you look at this, the alterations of this kind of fatty layer in Alzheimer's disease, what you'll find is that there's less DHA and oleic acid in these membranes. And if you look at Parkinson's as well, less DHA as well, and EPA, and an increase in things like stearic acid and palmitic acid. So this is why eating the right quality of fats at this phase is so critical. making sure that we have enough DHA and oleic acid in our diet to really keep these cell membranes as healthy as possible, and avoiding damaged fats, because if you're eating fats that are damaged, kind of by browning or overcooking or processed fats, they insert into these membranes and you end up with damaged membranes. So thinking every time you're eating fats that these are going to be incorporated into your cell membranes. So the brain is highly, highly adaptable, which is really important, but it's exquisitely sensitive to fluctuations in estrogen. Genetics and epigenetics, so how we our body responds to the environment has an impact, and this is a very important thing to remember. So, and this is a good example of looking at endocrine disrupting chemicals. They impact how our genetics and our genes function. So if you keep everything in the environment stable, in other words, your blood glucose is well regulated, your adrenal glands are working well, you'll have a much better ability to adapt to these changes. And so I'm going to encourage all women, even before they get to the point of perimenopause, to make sure that they're taking care of adrenal glands, to make sure that they're taking care of blood glucose metabolism, making sure that they're looking at the oils and fats that are in their diets as well. So hot flashes. Research shows that when your glucose metabolism is not good, there is an increase in hot flashes. Glucose disbalance also impacts on sleep cycles. So now you have a combination where you're not sleeping well, you've got hot flashes, and that's a perfect storm for increasing cognitive decline as well. So this is a really interesting study showing blood flow and glucose uptake in the brain in premenopausal women on the left and postmenopausal on the right. And you can see that in premenopausal women, you have a much higher level of blood flow and glucose metabolism. So that's indicated by the kind of red, orange colors, whereas blue is a low level of uptake. And so thinking about vascular health becomes really important as well. Looking after circulation and blood flow is particularly important at this phase in life. So big focus today has been on estrogen. I just wanted to mention progesterone. We're not talking much about it today because we're primarily talking about the brain, where estrogen has got a much bigger role to play. So it doesn't have the same effects on nerve cells or brain cells. However, it does kind of help to keep estrogen stabilized and in check. So when the progesterone levels are low, estrogen levels are also kind of just all over the place. So from a functional medicine point of view, we really focus on getting the kind of foundations right. So even before you go down the route of hormone replacement therapy or bioidentical hormones, you really want to make sure you get all of these foundations sorted. Regulate your blood glucose control, supporting vascular flow and blood flow, good quality cell membranes, and other things that could be leading into this: adrenal issues, stress, vitamin deficiencies, thyroid issues, all need to be addressed before you move into perimenopause. And then the steroid pathways, this may be a little small on your screens to see, but think of this is like like a factory production line of how your hormones are made. It all starts with cholesterol. And interestingly enough, women in their 40s, very often, that's when cholesterol levels are climbing up as well, or often put on statins, which will never really reduce the cholesterol levels, even further, and have an impact on hormones. So we need cholesterol. It's often vilified, but you need the right type of cholesterol to start the production of hormones. And as you go down this pathway, little bits are added to, along the way to make certain hormones. So if you are, if anything in this pathway isn't working well, we end up with difficulty in getting the hormone balance just right. And I want you to notice just how often glucose comes up. High blood glucose or high insulin levels can block several of these paths. You'll notice vitamin D and inflammation are absolutely key components here as well. So getting those levels, vitamin D levels up, making sure that there's no inflammation as well, just to make sure that these pathways can flow naturally. So that also means that, with HRT or bio-HRT, you're putting in hormones at the end here. You're putting estrogen at the end, or progesterone or testosterone. You want to try and allow your body to produce some of that itself as well. And that means working upstream to make sure all these things are working as well as they could be. Key takeaways: avoid stimulants, particular caffeine and alcohol, depressants as well. The reason for this is because anything that is going to stimulate a system that's already a little bit shaky, we know that caffeine and alcohol have got a huge impact on flashes, and that in itself can impact on sleep as well. Balancing blood sugar, so that's avoiding processed and refined foods. Protein with every meal. Protein becomes really, really important, again, for that blood glucose stability. Keeping your meal times regular, thinking of complex carbs rather than fast releasing carbs. And healthy fats for your cell membranes, so avocado oil, fish oil. Mindful eating, so not eating when you're stressed or on the run. And if we talk about the integrity of the nervous system, we want to think about good quality omega oils for their cell membranes. So that means avoiding burnt, fried or browned foods. Getting enough lecithin in, so you can get that through eggs, or if you're vegan, lecithin granules. Increasing your monosaturated fats, avocado, olives, macadamia. That's going to get the right fats into the cell membranes. Ground flaxseed or chia, flaxseed in particular, has got an effect on hormones, which can be quite helpful. And again, the right oils: fish, sardines, mackerel, anchovy, salmon, herring, so your cold water fishes, at least 3 times a week. And avoiding your large fish like tuna, because they have high levels of mercury contamination. And boosting your intake of phospholipids with, for women, 5 to 7 eggs a week, and olive or avocado oil for cooking. Then being very, very careful to keep those pro-inflammatory fats out. Again, these ones are going to be damaging those cell membranes. So we're looking at your hydrogenated or trans fats that are in processed foods and ready meals. And they incorporate into those cell membranes, they make them rigid, they trigger an inflammatory process. And excess omega-6 found in vegetable oils and processed foods, sometimes even marketed as healthy, can shift the balance towards an inflammatory state. And we saw in that production line of hormones, inflammation is one thing that's going to grind the hormone production to a halt. Supplements. DHEA is one of my favorites, but we only really recommend that with after you've had blood testing to check what your DHEA levels are like. Methylated B vitamins are very helpful for the production of hormones. DIM if your estrogen levels are very high. Anti-inflammatories if there's an inflammatory process. And there's this lovely little French product called Cerellis, which many of my patients find really, really helpful for perimenopausal symptoms. So that's something worth looking into as well. And then herbal medicine. So Supporting the adrenals becomes critical. So your adrenals will take over production of estrogen when your ovaries begin to wind up their production. And if you already have adrenal dysfunction, an additional load on them is going to, really make the system struggle. So things you can do to support your adrenals: 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day. Your B vitamins, they have to be methylated. Pantothenic acid, magnesium citrate is really good, adaptogenic herbs, and then of course we sometimes use glandulars if necessary. Research therapies as well. Good evidence for acupuncture and biofeedback on helping with a range of perimenopausal symptoms. Phytoestrogens, which are plant extracts that have a mild estrogenic effect, they can be helpful. We'll look at more of those in a minute. And then there are some herbs as well that can be quite helpful in reducing symptoms. So phytoestrogens that are found in plants, so some of these are herbs, but you can see there's broccoli, carrots, flaxseed, green tea, and some of your legumes will also have an impact on estrogen, which can be very, very helpful. So try and incorporate some of these into the diet every day. And then some basic lifestyle things as well. Weight-bearing exercise has become really important around this time of life, for bone health, for brain, cardiovascular health as well. Stress management, yoga, green space breathing, whatever it is for you. We're all different. Not everybody's the yoga type or the type to do meditation. I think it's finding your thing, the thing that's going to help you wind down stress. And then weight is an interesting one. So women do tend to put on a pound or two around perimenopause, and that's also because fat tissue will take over some of the production of estrogen. So it's not a bad thing to put on a little bit of extra padding for that. However, you don't want to put on much more than 2 pounds, because we also know that studies show the higher your BMI and the higher visceral fat is, the increase in symptoms, in particular hot flashes and general estrogenic symptoms. One thing to be very careful of is xenoestrogens. These are endocrine disrupting chemicals that are widely found in our environment now, in our cosmetics, in plastics. They block the estrogen receptors in the body, and that makes it, they really mess up our hormones. One thing to watch out for is paper receipts. So the ink that's used on these paper receipts at the checkouts have got a chemical in that disrupts hormones as well. So if you have to take a receipt, take it on the bit where the paper doesn't touch. So definitely have a look at this. There are some really lovely apps out there that can help you scan products very quickly to check for xenoestrogens in. I've got an app called Yucca, which is YUKA, and you just scan the barcode of products, and that can be quite helpful in just determining what's inside a product and whether there are any endocrine disruptors in there. So in summary, our brains are largely regulated by estrogen, and as levels decline, it will contribute to short and long-term neurodegenerative processes. Many women, and most women, will adapt, but it is also a very critical time then for taking care of the brain to make sure that you don't go on to have any lasting effects. What you do in perimenopause can make a big difference on what's going to happen cognitively for you in the next 20-30 years. And so much of this is modifiable. So, through diet and lifestyle and quality sleep, you can really make a big difference to the long-term impact that this hormonal change period will have. So thank Thank you very much for joining me. I whizzed through that. I needed to do that in under 30 minutes. But there's tons more information available. We also run a 6-week brain health program where we take you week by week through very specific things that you can do in order to keep your brain healthy throughout life, really, but especially during this very critical perimenopausal phase.